How you doing, YouTube? Matt Massa Beer Reviews. Not back with a beer review. New segment time. We pop these off every now and then because sometimes I get bored. Not necessarily bored of doing beer reviews, but I like to bring more to the proverbial table of beer stuff. And doing a podcast, kind of stopped doing that again because it's pandemic and kid is hard. And I like the long form stuff, and I like to do stuff that's not review wise. And I was thinking about what I could do, and I don't know how I came on the conversation of this. I was talking to somebody else, and they just started asking me about beer and how I got into beer. And I've told these stories many a times, but I figured I'd kind of do like a series of me just kind of talking about my experience and experiences I've had in beer. From beginning to present day. I'll give it some kitschy name like Massive Beer Musings or something along those lines, and then what we'll do is we'll post these. I'm not going to give you a hard line every this day, every that day. I'm going to post them when I want. But I actually made an outline today and just started jotting down a lot of where I want to go with it. And I want to try to keep it as linear timeline-wise as far as the stories and the things that I share, because a lot of people ask me these questions too. What was your favorite experience in beer? Who's your favorite brewery? What favorite brewery to go to? You know what I mean? How'd you get into beer? All that kind of stuff. So I figured it'd be fun, at least something for me to do, and do a little bit of kind of time capsuling of my beer experience. So that way, when my son Micah gets old enough, he can watch them in shame, because his dad is talking into YouTube, which by the time he gets old enough is going to be like, I don't know, that'd be like 8-track tapes for me. And here we go. So we'll start off how I got into beer, man. It's probably one of the biggest questions I think almost all of us get. And I don't mean all of us as far as like people that do beer journalism or YouTube or stuff like that. I think it's just general. If you're a beer lover and you talk to people getting into beer or piqued in their interest, they ask you how you got into beer. And mine was a really cool path. I am 45. I'm 45, right? Yeah, I'm 45 years old. I got into beer in my late, early 20s, technically. Late 20s, but whatever. So I was 20, turning 21, and I went up to Canada. Before this, I really didn't have a ton of beer experience, stealing beers off my dad, throwing keggers in the woods, that kind of thing. Because my dad was a beer drinker. We used to own a bar, my parents did. And they sold it by the time I was 16, so I couldn't really use it all that much. But a good friend of mine, my buddy Matt from New Jersey, had a lake house up by me, and we would throw parties there all the time. It was like, at that time, we're talking high school level, I thought Miller Genuine Draft was the height of sophistication and whatnot. And I just kind of toiled around, just doing the random generic beer stuff. I dabbled in a little bit of crafty stuff when someone kind of crossed my path. But you also have to understand, back then you're talking about the mid to late 90s. I turned 21 in 1997, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 1997. So back then, the likes of Sierra Nevada, the likes of Dogfish Head, those kind of breweries existed, but there was very few and far between to see them. You almost had to go to the brewery themselves to get the beer. It really didn't even see any of their stuff distributed in a distributor, let alone a beer bottle shop. Those things didn't exist back then. So, I just kind of friends would give me stuff. I remember my first real good beer I had was a Chicory Stout from Dogfish Head. But I had it, and I was like, what was this? But it was in the middle of just a random party. So I thought about it, but I didn't really think about it all that much. And then I took a trip. I think it was 1998, 97, 98. I went up to Canada, for I guess a convention kind of thing. At the time I was working in a tattoo shop. I was a body piercer, modification artist. One of the country's largest, or the world's largest, kind of magazines when it came to body piercing and body modification was based out of Toronto. I was kind of like a guest writer for them and stuff like that, and we're having like a get together, a barbecue is basically what it was up there in Toronto. And I was like, okay, let's go up there. And I get there, hanging out. Got there early in the afternoon. It was like a 3-day event on a Friday, and I was what the guy, I forget half the people's. I think his name was Paul. One of the guys I used to work with a lot was Bob, Paul, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we get up there and he's like, oh, we're going to run to the beer store. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'll come with you. And he's like, okay. And I was like, yeah, you guys got really good beer up here. Mind you, this is me not knowing anything about beer. And when I said, I think you have really good beer up here, I was referring to Molson Triple X because I was like, ooh, down in the States in the mid 90s, it was like, you can't get Molson Triple X down here. It's way too high in alcohol and they won't sell it, which is false, but it was, old wives' tale. And I was like, I didn't say that. I didn't say Molson. I said, they have really good beer. And he was like, yeah, we have some pretty good stuff. And we get to the beer store, and lo and behold, to me, it's the actual fucking beer store. Like, if you've never been to Canada, there's two places you could buy beer: the LCBO, which you want to think about in the terms of like you go to a shop that sells like wine, liquor, and beer. And the beer store is what you would refer to as a beer distributor. And that's all they sell. But it was called The Beer Store, and it looked like Home Depot. The sign did, at least. It was big and orange, and it was just, you'd walk in and there was basically bottles, a bunch of bottles on a wall, and then you'd be like, I'll take a case of that. You'd only buy a case, and out on a conveyor belt would come the case of beer. Like someone in the back room would like throw it out on this conveyor belt, and then you buy it. Okay. And I was like, okay. I'm like, so I get there and there's all these beers, and I'm like, I have no idea what. I'm like, you recommend something to me, I'm not trying to, I was like, I think you got good beer up here, and I'm like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And he's like, oh, get this. He's like, that's my favorite beer. I was like, okay, so I'll get a case of that. Turned out to be Unibrew Maudite, which is a Belgian strong dark. So let's rewind a little bit. You're talking about a guy that was drinking Miller Genuine Draft, you know what I mean? Miller, those kind of things. Crappy, shitty beers, Rolling Rocks. Love me some Rolling Rocks. So Jenny Creams. We're into Jenny Creams back then. So, to go from your 4% macro adjunct lager to a pushing double-digit Belgian dark, I was like, okay. But I didn't know that yet. I just bought a case of beer. I was like, I bought this case of beer. So, we go back to the barbecue location and hang out for a bit, and it's beer time. And I was like, crack a beer. I'm like, this is freaking delicious. This is fantastic. I can't believe, what am I drinking? Why am I not been drinking this? This is great. So I drank like 2 6-packs. I'm not even thinking it was a problem. It couldn't have been 2 6-packs. I would have blacked out before that, but I drank way too much. Let's say I drink a 6-pack of a Belgian Strong Dark. I got obliterated. Thank God for. There was no Uber back then, but they were called taxis, and public transit. And, you're talking, I'm 21, so hangovers aren't really a thing. But I'm like, I remember things tasted awesome, and I remember having a blast, and I feel awesome because I'm young and hangovers don't exist yet. And I drank that case over the weekend. And I brought a 6-pack back with me, and I was just like, it just kind of piqued my interest, and I was just, I don't know, there was something, I was just there. I was hooked, I guess you would say. And I just came back with like this kind of like want of something that I had no idea about. And you have to understand, back then, it's like, internet didn't really exist back then. It did. But it was it was Angel Fire and GeoCities, it wasn't, there was beer knowledge to be had, but it was few and far between. A lot of it was still, there was, this Beer Connoisseur magazine, and there was Michael Jackson stuff and stuff like that you just kind of, you dove into. I think most beer people that got into beer back then did the same thing, but it wasn't like, you're kind of like, oh, let me go to my local resource beer club, blah, 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 blah. Those kind of things just didn't really exist. So it was kind of like, where do I go from here? And then it dawned on me that I remembered a good friend of mine. So I had this real crush on this one girl, and I always hang around her and stuff like that. And she was a waitress at this bar. And I remember hanging out with the guy that she worked with, and then he had some crazy fancy beer. And I was like, I'll go ask that dude if he knows what this beer is and if I can get it, and I'll just drink this for the rest of my life. So I'm like, I call her up. I was like, hey, who's that guy? And he's like, oh, his name's Ian. Be like, be like, he works here. Be like, come by or whatever when I'm working. I'll introduce you back to him again or whatever. Anyway, and then it was just like, okay, I'll go there and see what's what. And it ends up being, in hindsight, it was actually one of the greatest beer bars that I've ever been in my life. It just was such a unicorn back then that it was just like, I didn't even know what it was. It was like oblivious to the fact that it was this great, amazing bar. I will probably, maybe during this, I'll superimpose or I'll put up a thing. I actually have I saved. I don't know how I saved it because I don't save it. I saved a beer menu from them, and I found it like 15, 20 years later. There was a place called Elmer Suds. It was in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And they had this amazing beer list. Like, amazing. Amazing by today's standards. Sure, they didn't have any hazies or anything like that. But by today's standards, like, they had Hardy's. They had Westfield's over the counter. Like, you can go there and get Westy 12s, Westy 8s. You can get Thomas Hardy's. You can get J.W. Lee's. You can get Cantillon. You can get Fantôme. You can get all these breweries like Lambic and Craziness and all this amazing European beer at kind of those prices were reasonable. It was like a Hardy's was like $8. I remember looking at this, one of my whales, not to get super sidetracked, one of my whales is when I eventually got into beer there, was they had Courage Russian Imperial Russian Stouts, and they had the little 8-ounce bottles, and it was like $18. I was like, I'll never spend that much on a beer. I'll buy that all day now. Anyway, but back to the actual timeline of this stuff is that I just sat down and I walked in. I was like, hey, and blah blah blah. Started chatting them up and stuff. And I was like, I just went to Canada and I came back and I had this beer. It's called Maudit from Univer. He's like, yeah, we have that. He's like, what? It's like, yeah, give me one of those, dude. And I was like, drank a couple of them. I was like, that was awesome, dude. Thanks. Blah blah blah, and then left and come back a couple days, week later, and be like, yeah, and I kept going there and drinking Unibrew Maudit, and then after a week or two, he's like, you want to try something else, dude? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, I like this. He's like, oh, there's a lot of stuff that you might like, and he's like, try this. And you probably get, I don't know what he gave me next, but it was, probably something in Belgian Dark, Belgian Brune or something like that. And I was like, oh, this is really, really good. And then I guess it must have been just my generic naivete in combination with like a bit of enthusiasm and want to kind of explore and stuff like that. And he saw that and he was like super, extremely knowledgeable about beer. He still is to this day. And he was just like, he's like, man, he's like, you don't... come back. He's like, I'll hook you up. He's like, just, the only thing is I'll just give you whatever I want to give you in. And he's like, I'll hook you up. We'll drink some beers, but in change for you, just kind of trust in me or whatever. He's like, I'll kind of tell you everything about these beers. And he kind of gave me like a crash course, on beer. Across the board, from everything from traditional old school IPA to stouts to porters to lambic to farmhouse beers to saison, everything across the board, everything they had to offer back then, and it was awesome, man. It was very cool. I think I was one of the more lucky ones to have that experience of being, like, for lack of a better word, mentored, and when it came to beer, because it's like, it's so hard to quantify, so hard to relate how barren the beer world was back then as far as people in the beer. Of course, I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. At this time, I lived like 4 blocks away from this bar, so it wasn't even like I had to drive to go there. And it was just, I don't remember any place ever existing like that place existed anywhere else. There's a place like 30 minutes away. There's a pizza place, Sabatini's. I've mentioned them before. They were like that, but outside of that, I still don't know of any place that was like existed like that. So I was very, very lucky to that extent. I have such an exposure. Not just exposure, but just kind of like, hand walking, handheld led kind of experience into it. And I think it kind of, It was good and bad. I think it kind of shaped me in a specific way to where I was like, a little crash coursey. And it's probably a lot the way people today get into the beer. Back then it was like you had to find your way, and it's not like I learned every single thing about beer. I lived there for a year or so, moved away, started exploring on my own. But it definitely shaped me as far as like what my core experience was getting into beer, which is Belgian beer and English beer and kind of old school kind of U.S. beer. And it went from there, and it was a cool experience. I can remember it like it was yesterday, actually, and that's the craziest part about it. And you have to think about it, man. We're going on what, God, oh my God, 25 years ago? I can't believe that's real. I cannot believe that's real. So 25, give or take 25 years ago, I was just getting into beer and not really knowing anything. And just having that experience of trying this whole new thing, and like I said, it's not an uncommon tale. I think my experience of meeting somebody that kind of mentored me through it in that time and place is very unique. There's a lot of people in the beer now, so you could do that. But like I said, like back then it was barren. If I met one person a year who was in the beer back then, I was amazed. Being in that bar, you would meet people. It would be obvious, but I'm talking about in the real world. Nowadays, you could be at a gas station or a freaking Ruby Tuesdays or whatever. Ruby Tuesdays doesn't even exist anymore, does it? And you can see somebody who's just like, I'm going to Treehouse this weekend. That kind of thing. That didn't exist back then. So it was just a cool way to kind of dive into things, and it was kind of just set up that kind of foundation about getting into beer and all that kind of stuff. Now here I am today talking on YouTube about beer. It's really, really weird. Still really good friends with my buddy Ian. Facebook friends mostly. He's moved out of the area. But he works at a brewery. He opened up him and the one guy I worked with at Elmer Suds, when they closed not too shortly after, maybe about like 5-6 years after that, and they moved to Florida. They ended up opening their own bar that was open for quite a bit, and then they kind of just split ways from there. And he's been in the industry, whether it be from the bottle shop side of things or the brewery side of things, for quite a bit now. And that's the time this guy got into beer. How about that? We'll cap this one off there, and we'll take it scene by scene, or stage by stage, I guess. Next one will probably be me talking about just kind of growing in that, because after that, it's me kind of growing into like what I really, really enjoyed in a beer. Then it was finding and exploring what I really enjoyed, or finding and exploring what I found tasty. And then the next stage is me kind of teaming up with a couple good friends and kind of honing exactly what our favorite kind of beers are and things like that. And that's a really fun kind of period of time. So we'll do that one next. Like I said, I'll try to pop these off on a semi-regular basis. But it should be fun. So there you go. Questions, comments, what do you guys think? How did you guys get into beer? Let's talk about that. Pop that down there. Share your experience about how you got into it. Did you have somebody on your side mentor you guys when it came to beer? Be really interested to see where a lot of you guys, especially some of your regular commenters, not that I probably know some of your stories because we've talked previously, but let me know what you guys, how you've gotten into beer, things like that. Conversely, is there something you want to know? Experience-wise, I've shared all the little tidbits over the years. If they're like, one time you mentioned this, what was that all about? Or tell us this thing, or how'd you get into this? Why do you do it this way? Why are you like the way you are? Oh, that's a deep question. Yeah, should be fun. I'm going to keep up on these until I run out of content, but I got a nice little list going, so we'll go from there. So there you go. What are we going to call these? Probably Massive Beer Musings, and then it'll be, semicolon, that time Matt, blah, 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 blah. Let's do that. So it's that time Matt got into craft beer. That's what this episode will be. And we'll go from there. So there you go. Like I said, comments down below. Your own experiences in the same kind of avenue. Getting into beer, how'd you get into it? Mentorship, how you explored the beer world. When was it? What was your favorite beers when you got into stuff? Hardy's, Maudit. Those kind of beers were Westphalians were my jams. And any comments, suggestions, or whatever you'd like me to talk about. So there you go. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this little rambling session. Hopefully you enjoy the future ones coming up. Hopefully you're drinking a beer right now. Hope to see you next time. Cheers.